Hello and welcome. Glad to be back with you. We are, wow, under pressure, under the gun. But anyway, I'm glad to be back with you. Here we are for episode 40 of Course in Miracles, chapter 3. We're going to be talking about judgment and the authority problem. And I'm your host, Brother T. And we're just kind of getting things started. Just had some technical issues I had to clear up. Before I lost a hard drive this week, lost a lot of files, but I was able to recover enough of them to kind of get things back together. But anyway, that's kind of where that's at. And I appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. Thanks for being here. This is a live stream tonight, so we're going to see how that goes. And let's see what else I've got here. Yeah, okay, I'm Brother T. I'm just working through a couple of things. Well, obviously, we're going to be talking about this work right here, A Course in Miracles. This is going to be our topic for tonight. This is the edition. We're using the JCIM edition, jcim.net. You can go to that website and find your way there. Also, you'll find this is the CIMS edition, Course in Miracles Society edition. The reason that I love to use this edition, as you've heard me say before, is simply because nothing has been taken out. In the Foundation for Inner Peace version, the Blue Book version by Kenneth Wapnick, it was about 25% of the text was removed in the first 4 or 5 chapters, up to 25% in some of those chapters. And so I just want to, for myself, it's been very helpful to have all of that content in my experience in A Course in Miracles. So I hope that you are receiving this well on your end. I'm going to, let's switch over here to the camera mode and we're going to get to it. I've got some, I've got to change my setting here. Give me a second, guys. Sorry about it. Let's take a good deep breath. I want to start with a prayer. And so I just want to share this prayer with you. And it's from A Course in Miracles, called Forgive My Illusions.
Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no illusions, and where none can ever enter. Our holiness is yours. What can there be in us that needs forgiveness when yours is perfect? The sleep of forgetfulness is only the unwillingness to remember your forgiveness and your love. Let us not wander to temptation, for the temptation of the Son of God is not your will. And let us receive only what you have given, and accept but this into the minds which you created and which you love. Amen.
I send my love over the mountains. I send my love over the sea. I send my love into the heavens, and it returns to me.
And that was the beautiful Lori Lefevre. So here we are, we're back. We're going to be talking about this section, Judgment and the Authority Problem. So I want to just kind of talk about it briefly with you before we get going here. Let's see if I can kind of get myself in the shot here. I'll come in down here. So the authority problem really stems from the idea that we created ourselves. So we didn't. God created us. But the ego believes that it it kind of is God, so to speak. And it believes that it's the creator of its existence. And that's where the whole idea of birth and death comes in, that you could actually take your life as an example of that. The ego it doesn't really like us too much, and it actually even leads us ultimately to, in some cases, to our own destruction, so to speak, from our habits and some of the things that we do. It's just weird. It's just really weird. So it comes from judgment. You know, judgment is the part of what the ego's doing, and it's creating thoughts, it's creating ideas and perceptions, and it's trying to cause us to believe that it is us. Of course, it is not. But the point is that it wants to be in control of everything. Even it believes in its own creation. So clearly there are a lot of people that might argue that there's no such thing as God, but that's really a denial of God, and you can't really deny anything and say that you don't believe in it, which is kind of an oxymoron. And then also we could say that, the ego, that you only have one life. There is nothing after this. We're just kind of freaks of nature, right? In other words, nature evolved itself, and here we are. It even would give consciousness credit for our evolution, or it would give evolution credit for our consciousness. Let me put that in that way. So the authority problem and judgment are the hallmarks of the ego construct, the ego self. And so as we jump into this section tonight, judgment and the authority problem, as we're jumping into this section tonight, we're going to really begin to have dialogue now about that. Okay, about that. So let me get myself out of the picture here, if you will, and let's jump right in. Let's see if I can get my screen out of the way. I apologize. I'm having to restructure a few things tonight. Let me see if I can get me out of the frame a little bit more, a little better. Yeah, just give me a second. I'm just going to move me over a little bit and see if that works. Yeah, that works. That's good enough, right? We can live with that. Okay, let's jump in. 61. And if you're trying to follow along in this book, which you would be, of course, we're on page 51, and this is paragraph 61 in the textbook section, or textbook chapter 3, section 8, Judgment and the Authority Problem. We've already discussed the last judgment in some though insignificant detail. We've already talked about the last judgment, and let me just refresh ourselves here. The last judgment would be the realization. You could say the judgment of God. The last step is God would lay judgment on you, as an example. But the point is that honestly, the point would be that you are perfectly innocent. That's the last judgment. God guarantees your sinlessness, and therefore you are perfectly innocent. So that would be the last judgment. And we have talked about it, but insufficiently, he says. After the last judgment, there will be no more judgment. There's only wholeness. There's only oneness. There's nothing that could ever be judged. So after that last judgment, you're free. We are free, we are free, right? There'll be no more judgment. This is symbolic only in the sense that everyone is much better off without judgment. And we're much better off without our own judgment, the judgment of the ego self, for sure, right? That we're much better off without the judgment of the ego self. So when the Bible says, judge not that ye be not judged, it merely means that if you judge the reality of others at all, you'll be unable to avoid judging your own. So that begs the question for me as I interject again here and interrupting the flow and saying, have you questioned your reality? Do you question other people's reality? Do you question other people's judgment? Do you question their construct of how they, of the decisions they make, of the way they live their life? With all that's going on, and this is the middle, if you will, the 18th of June in 2020, and if you're watching this in sometime in the future, thank you. But if you're watching this sometime in the future, then you already know about the history and maybe some of the outcomes of the coronavirus, the pandemic that's taken over our attention in the world, that began months ago now, 4 or 5 months ago. Also, in the most recent month, in this month in particular, there's been, in the Western culture, there's been riots. There's been, the beginnings of a revolution, almost looks like a revolution of governance. There's organizations that have taken the headlines and caused the COVID-19 experience to be pushed completely out of the news, out of the media, and people are reacting in very, very strange ways to all this stuff. But my argument here, my point is that if we judge any of it, we're doing it from the mind of the ego self. The only way for us to see truly what is the truth, to truly know what is really going on, would be to be joined in union and relationship with our higher self, with the Holy Spirit. I mean, that's really the only way, because of itself, the ego is absolutely not capable of knowing anything about anything, really. It's not capable of judgment, but its entire premise is based on being the judge and the jury, and ultimately the punisher, if you will. So we are unable to avoid the choice to judge rather than to know was the cause of the loss of peace. We're really unable through the ego to know anything at all in truth. It's all of its premise, all of its thoughts are all based on illusory concepts of understanding, of illusory concepts of what we are, what it is. And of course it tries to convince us that it is us. It is not what we are. It is not who we are. And we go through A Course in Miracles beginning to get deeper and deeper and closer to the realization, in fact, of what we are and who we are and how we, why we came here in this incarnation, why we came to this third dimensional world, etc., etc. And A Course in Miracles helps us to begin to understand what's going on, the real narrative, the real story about what's happening, because there seems to be so much confusion, again, about what's happening, what's really going on in the world today. And the only way to know, to really truly know, is to move beyond our small-minded thinking, quote-unquote thinking, and to quieten that mind and join in union and relationship with Spirit. So the choice to judge rather than to know was the cause of the loss of peace, the separation. Judgment is the process on which perception, but not cognition, rests. We have discussed this before in terms of the selectivity of perception, pointing out that evaluation is its obvious prerequisite. Evaluation is its obvious prerequisite, okay? Which means that judgment requires observation, and it requires that we look to the past, we look to the definitions, we look to each other, we look to guidance from others. We are continuously trying to understand and grasp, some basis of reality, some construct of reality based on those judgments and those perceptions. And and the prerequisites is that we're always looking into the past to try to discover and see where we are. So is it any wonder why so many people are confused at this present moment? Because we don't have any past. We don't have a past that can help us to decipher and understand. There's nothing in our lifetimes. There's nothing that's gone on in over, 100 years now, where anybody that was alive 100 years ago would have been an infant. You're very young, right? Maybe a teenager at best. And so there's really none among us that have much experience, if any experience at all, other than what been passed on through historical documentation about what could be going on. But this is nothing like it was 100 years ago. And I'm talking about the Great Depression of the 1930s. And as far as our government and our economy is concerned, but we've not ever in this country experienced a global pandemic, or in this country or the world, a global pandemic of this nature. Let's continue. So judgment always involves rejection. Remember, we have to go back to the past. We have to the ego has to do all this evaluation, and it has to make decisions in split seconds, microseconds. It defaults to through a filter system and comes into judgments and decisions, and it rejects a ton of stuff. It's amazing how fast our mind actually can resolve a judgment and declare a judgment. Judgment always involves rejection. It is not an ability which emphasizes only the possible aspects, the positive aspects of what is judged. It typically looks for the negatives in what is being judged, right? Whether it be in or out of the self, right? Whether we're judging ourselves or we're judging outside something from ourselves. However, what's been perceived and rejected or judged and found wanting remains in the unconscious because it's been perceived. One of the illusions from which man suffers is the belief that what he judged against has no effect. This cannot be true unless he also believes that what he judged against does not exist. He evidently does not believe this, or he would not have judged against it. It does not matter in the end whether you judge right or wrong. Either way, you're placing your belief in the unreal. This cannot be avoided in any type of judgment because it implies the belief that reality is yours to choose from. And it's not. There's only a choice between two things: fear and love. The ego mind, the constructs of the thinking self, personality self, all of its constructs are based on fear. It doesn't know love. It can't know love. It has no understanding of love. It makes up a whole construct about love, and it talks about how love can be cruel. It thinks about love in completely erroneous ways, and it constructs these ideas. I want to get myself together at some point. There's so much I want to do and add more to our experience here as A Course in Miracles. But I was watching a show this week about a culture where, and this isn't something that's so foreign to us here in the U.S., but of course not historically, but it is of course to us now. But this gentleman was from Pakistan, and he lived here in the United States, and their culture literally almost demanded that his marriage, whoever he would be married to, would be a planned marriage, and it would be determined by his parents. Also, who he could love then, if you see, would be determined. How he could, who and what he could love would be determined by the past and by cultural edicts and dogma. And I'm not dissing any religious belief or anything like that. You know, you're entitled. Everyone's entitled. Everybody has a right to be here, Everybody is here to discover for themselves the truth, and we're all going through this journey, our individual and collective journey of awakening. And because of that, there's just no way that we can even begin to grasp all the different filters that other people are going through in cultures literally that just transcend and sometimes just state lines here in the West. I mean, I can't really grasp a lot of the cultural requirements of existing, if you will, on the West Coast versus the East Coast. I mean, the difference between the way things are done in New York as compared to Hollywood, and how people treat each other, and the social requirements to be not judged and not looked at and not stand out as being weird or not getting along or not being accepted, or extreme. And that's just a few hundred miles, literally. Well, maybe a couple thousand at the most, right? I mean, it's just not and that's within this country of the United States. So it's really weird. It's really weird. All of the constructs, if we begin to look at it, when we really begin to question our reality, it's really weird. All of the constructs that the egos come up with about love, but it's even worse. It's even more exotic and outrageous and fantastic. In other words, it's a fantasy about how the ego uses fear to dominate our perceptions of everything in the world. And of course, that's what he's talking about in this particular section right here, that it's about error of judgment, and that this cannot be avoided in any type of judgment, which is that we're placing belief in the unreal, because it's all illusory. The constructs are all made up. It's us making them up, right? All these constructs. So let's go to the next, let's go to 63 here. You have no idea of the tremendous release and deep peace that comes from meeting yourselves and your brothers totally without judgment. Let's take a good deep breath. Maybe we could ask for that, right? That would be a nice dialogue to have with the higher self, and to say, you know what? I have no idea what it would be like to experience peace for myself if I could let go of judgment. So I could ask my higher self, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, nothing more than my right mind, if you will, when I refer to the Holy Spirit, to what is the truth? How can I see through your eyes? How can I see the truth without the judgment of that small thinking, crazy, chaotic, small self, the thinking mind? The deep peace that would come from that would certainly be worth the effort. And we talked about last week about dialogue and practicing that dialogue with your higher self. So when you recognize what you and your brothers are, I want to talk about that. Let's come back to it in a minute. You'll realize that judging them in any way is without meaning, period. In fact, their meaning is lost to you precisely because you are judging them. All uncertainty comes from a totally fallacious belief, a false belief, that you are under the coercion of judgment. You do not need judgment to organize your life, and you certainly do not need it to organize yourselves. In the presence of knowledge, all judgment is automatically suspended. And this is the process which enables recognition to replace perception. So what I was getting a glimpse of when I was reading that last couple of sentences there was the experience of awe. And awe, as we've learned, is reserved for the one-way communication, a one-way communication with God, with the source of all that is, with love. In other words, coming through the heart, the knowing of the heart. It's there within you, the very center of your being. I'm not talking about the physical heart, it's symbolic of it. But at the very center of your being lies the heart. And this self is the knowing of certainty. The certainty of knowing, I think would be a better way for me to say that. And to be in union with that mind, the thinking self can't go there. So it's almost like we're carrying this heavy luggage, but we're going up this stairway. And as we go up this stairway, we begin to see, feel more and more that we can't get it, the stairway is getting more and more narrow, and we just have to let it go. In order to continue to progress towards our goal, which is to get to the top of the stairway, we literally have to let go of the bag and baggage. And that bag and baggage is judgment. In order to be in the upper room, I like to call it, to be in this space of love, where love is what we're experiencing, real love, not the made-up love of the ego, but where love can really be experienced. In order for that to be our experience, we have to let go. We have to leave all of that judgment stuff behind, right? So I'd like to end right here tonight with where we are. I really feel like shorter sessions are called for, and maybe a little bit more discussion. And I think maybe if I can, soon, I don't know if we'll get it together for next week or not, but soon I want to start bringing in some small movie clips to just help make the point of what Jesus is teaching us here in A Course in Miracles, and maybe to make it a little bit more entertaining for you, right? So we'll go with that. So let's close out with a prayer, and I just want to grab my coursework here for a second. Let's take a good deep breath. Let every voice but God's be still in me. Father, today I would but hear your voice in deepest silence. I would come to you to hear your voice and to receive your word. I have no prayer but this. I come to you to ask you for the truth. And truth is but your will, which I would share with you today. Today we let go. Today we let no ego thoughts direct our words or actions. When such thoughts occur, we quietly step back and look at them, and then we let them go. We do not want what they would bring with them, and so we do not choose to keep them. They're silent now. And in the stillness, hallowed by his love, God speaks to us and tells us of our will as we have chosen to remember him. And so it is. So very, very exciting. It's very exciting to imagine that we could experience the peace that is not even understandable to the ego self, not even comprehensible to ourself. And it is available to us. So the practice of meditation is really important. If you're working through the workbook lessons, I believe today we're on 170. If you're working through the workbook lessons, I applaud you and I support you in that journey. But you have, at this point, already realized that Jesus took us from just thinking about this thing for 1 minute, this particular lesson of the day. If we went all the way back to 165, 170 days ago, when we started on January 1st with the workbook lessons, that he takes us gently into the practice of meditation. He doesn't make it a huge, laborious, you got to meditate 8 hours a day kind of thing. Not at all. We start out very slowly, just a minute here and a minute there. But by the time you get to this point, and we are within 10 days or so, maybe 12 days away from being halfway through this year, right? Halfway through A Course in Miracles workbook. And, almost through the third chapter of the textbook. And the textbook just takes a while longer. And of course, we're just working here, for a short period each week as we're working through the textbook. But the point I want to make is that you are already, I'm sure, finding tremendous benefit and value from practice of meditation. So I hope that what we're doing here, and I pray that what we're doing here is helping to bring more clarity to your understanding of the workbook lessons, bringing more clarity to your understanding of what the course is really teaching you. And we've got a lot of work to do, yet of course we do, to understand it. And there's no big hurry, because time itself is an illusion. So with that, I want to share with you a little bumper music as we fade out, but I'm just thrilled that you stayed with me tonight and hung in there. And God bless you. Thank you very, very much for joining with me. And we will see you soon.